On social media, Douglas County Sheriff Aaron Hansen points out recent cases of animal abuse that resulted in probation. He tells First Alert 6 he wants to see harsher penalties than that, not to see more people in jail, but to hopefully deter others from committing similar crimes.
If someone is willing to engage in this terrible, brutal, violent behavior against an innocent animal, what are they willing to do to a kid? What are they willing to do to a vulnerable adult?
Currently, if an abuse case goes to the city attorney, they recommend charges and a judge determines the sentence. That can range from a fine to probation to 180 days in jail. If it's brought to the county attorney, a person could face felony charges and up to 3 years behind bars with a 15-year prohibition against owning or living with animals. Hansen would like to see more balance through public policy changes.
We need to give the judges more options. We have great judges in this county. Their hands have been tied by the state legislature in many cases. But we also have to send a strong message to that next person who's contemplating abusing or killing their animal or neglecting their animal. We need them to do the right thing. Go get help from the Humane Society. Do not subject your animals to this type of violence or abuse or neglect.
His department is working with the Nebraska Humane Society to crack down on this issue. Stephen Glant is the vice president of field operations for the Humane Society. He says so far this year, there have been 3 misdemeanor arrests and 4 felonies. When combined with about a half dozen active investigations, it's on par with 2023 numbers.
In my opinion, having one animal abuse or neglect case per year is one too many.
Glant says abuse isn't a one-size-fits-all crime. Images of malnourished pets or physically abused animals come to mind when the word abuse is used, but hoarding animals is also a form of abuse. Well-meaning people take in too many animals, which becomes a lot to manage.
Financially, it becomes a huge burden. They can't feed themselves, let alone all these pets that they've taken on, and it just it's like the snowball. It just keeps gaining speed.
Glant says in those cases, they do offer mental health help to curb future incidents. But he agrees harsher penalties could help with deterring more severe forms of abuse in the future.
Increased fines would be great. Increased jail time would also be great. I think at this point we're getting close to maybe looking at some legislative changes to increase penalties.
In Omaha, I'm Philip Catafamo, First Alert 6.
The sheriff says conversations are happening with state lawmakers to push for harsher penalties.